Today's episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm with over 20 years of experience.
Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund, or LTIF. It's focused on grocery-anchored retail real estate. These are the kinds of properties that some investors believe remain essential even in uncertain markets. People still need to buy food. That's what they say makes this sector more resilient and more stable over the long term.
Unlike many alternative investment funds that are only available to professionals, Greenman Open is open to a wide range of investors with lower minimum investments and a highly regulated structure.
Just remember, all investments carry risk. Values can go up or down, and past performance isn't a reliable guide to future returns. Greenman Open is a regulated LTIF, but you should always speak to a financial advisor before investing. Learn more on the website greenmanopen.com.
Hello and welcome to this, our edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
So, on the morning that we're recording, Israel is bombing Iran. We have Trump with the militarization of civil society in the United States, fascism, as a lot of people would describe it. And we have all sorts of carry-on going on north of the border, starting in Ballymena earlier in the week and moving into other unionist strongholds like Larne and Newton Ards and places like that. Actually, I want to start there because I think this is very interesting what's happening up north. I think Michelle O'Neill, as First Minister, has been extremely strong in condemning the racism, which is what's happening in Ballymena and other parts of the north as well. She has taken a very, very firm line. So has Matthew O'Toole of the SDLP, who I interviewed about this as well during the week. And the other political parties, with the exception of the Democratic Unionist Party, which I think is doing a bit like what the Tories are trying to do in the UK and trying to see off the rise of Nigel Farage's mob, that they're trying to play this anti-immigration card. And it has been deeply dangerous what the DUP has been doing up north. However, I suppose the bit that's relevant to us here in the south is the distinction between the way Michelle O'Neill has quite correctly handled this and the way Mary Lou McDonald handled the Dublin riots back in November 2023. Because if you remember back then, it was all the fault of the Garda Síochána. It was the fault of the Minister for Justice, who they put down a motion of no confidence in. And what Sinn Féin correctly is doing up north, I think, is setting a template for what Sinn Féin would have to do down south if anything else was to break out like what happened in the Dublin riots. What do you think?
Well, first of all, as regards Michelle, look, this is a loyalist heartland, County Antrim, Ballymena, Larne, those areas. Those would be classic cases, Portadown lately, whereby they'd be railing against the Taigs, the Catholics, if they weren't railing against the migrants.
Well, exactly. They're a month early. They usually save this for the 12th of July, you know?
So we
they do like a riot.
Yes.
And they do like a petrol bomb.
Absolutely. Over 40 police officers injured, reserves brought in from Scotland. John Boucher, the head of the PSNI, has said that the young girl who was allegedly raped, which sparked all this off, allegedly, the family are even more traumatised by these events.
I can only imagine what that poor girl is going through.
Absolutely. So that is unbelievable. But insofar as it is the case, I think what is interesting here is that there has been a little bit of pass the parcel. So you have these migrants. So I actually don't think, and I think it's outrageous if, hardworking people, Filipinos and other migrants who are well established in the community there for years, as opposed to some of these mobile IPA people, where the situation
they're all
is
people, Ivan.
No, they're all people. Well, put it like
this.
This is the distinction I draw: is the systems put in place because they wanted to get them out of the hotels, the Northern Ireland administration, they gave very generous subsidies in terms of rental, which has raised the cost of accommodation for everybody. So I don't know if it's been that well handled in terms of the UK. Like, this is a sweet spot between people trying to get to the EU and coming to the Republic of Ireland, and people trying to avail of the UK. And, you know, there is no doubt since Starmer's got in, there has been a slight relaxation in relation to migration. But basically, it is absolutely deplorable. It's wrong. And I have always said to you on this podcast that I regard a lot of Northern Ireland as a sectarian basket case, and this just is further evidence of it.
And, I mean, let's not put too fine a tooth in it, but many of those loyalists who are rioting are themselves descendants of migrants. Weren't they the people who came?
Planters, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's factually correct.
It is factually correct. And if you also look at things like, if you look at sort of like the right-wing mob who were involved in the Coolock disturbances, you know, they were going up north and making common cause with loyalist thugs.
They got their
Belfast.
way. Coolock has been dropped as a centre.
Well, they did, and I think that was a mistake on the part of the government. But just look at who these people associate with. And, you know, you can also, you know, I know what will happen is that I'm sure there'll even be one or two listeners from the far right who might listen to us just to get annoyed by things. And they'll go, it's all about protecting children. Women and children aren't safe because of these foreigners. Where were they when Davy Tweed was unmasked? You know Davy Tweed is, don't you?
No.
Davy Tweed he's dead now. He died in a motorbike accident, and people wondered, was it really an accident or did he kill himself? But Davy Tweed was the oldest player ever to play rugby for Ireland for first cap. He got his first cap at the age of 35 in the 1990s. And then he went on. He was sort of an infamous figure at 12th of July celebrations, and he became a local councillor. His daughter, who I've interviewed, has reported him for his vile abuse. He's a paedophile and he was a thug. And he was, yet when he died, despite the fact he'd already been in prison and was facing other charges, the likes of the TUV and others all came up paying tribute to him as a great, fine loyalist. And he was a scumbag. And, you know, these are the type of people that, you know, unfortunately live in our society. They're Irish, they're British, they're foreign, they're everything. You know, it's not the colour of a person's skin, it's not their political beliefs. There are bad people everywhere.
One other political angle, and you alluded to the DUP, Gordon Lyons, who's ironically the Communities Minister, is in a bit of trouble, I would have thought, because he tweeted that the families under attack, the migrants under attack, had been relocated in the Larne
community centre.
At the leisure centre, or whatever it was. And by sort of highlighting their location, what happened? The mobsters, the rioters, descended on the facility and smashed it up to pieces. And they mightn't have known but for that. So, I mean, it was quite inappropriate.
Inappropriate? I mean, when you think of what happened there was, there were lots of people had to be evacuated. There were people in swimming lessons and all the rest of it and stuff. It was highly irresponsible, but it also highlights part of the problem that they have in the system up in the north, because this is what I was interviewing Matthew O'Toole about. He believes that Lyons shouldn't be in his position. The others are all saying, and Lyons is turning around and saying, well, you can't get rid of me. I don't want to go. And because of the system they have, they could have a vote of no confidence.
The Dehont,
and it would actually...
But surely the DUP could nominate...
So the DUP will stand... Now, in fairness to Emma Little Pengilly, she has also condemned what is actually happening. But the DUP, I think, is badly split in relation to things like this. And it's a major, major problem that hopefully by the time this podcast goes to air will have been resolved or will have been diluted. But the unfortunate thing is it has actually spread, and basically sectarianism is turning into racism. But there is an interesting dichotomy up in the north as well, in that Sinn Féin has made itself very welcoming to immigrants in a way that it's now struggling to do in the south. Sinn Féin up north takes a very, as it does in the south, very pro-Palestinian position. And I think part of that is sometimes influenced by the fact that a lot of unionists take an exceptionally strong pro-Israel position. And that feeds into the
old
politics.
Rangers Celtic tribal nonsense.
Yeah. Okay, let's move
housing.
on to other things. Yeah, I think housing is definitely the
big story of the week.
It is. And the rent pressure zones. It was a fascinating week because on Monday, the speculation was that the government was going to do away with the rent pressure zones. And the opposition was gearing itself up and it was shouting, this is terrible, it can't possibly happen, you got to protect the renter. And then lo and behold, what happens on Tuesday? The rent pressure zones are extended nationally. They're effectively given more permanent footing, which certainly wrong-footed the opposition who were sort of shouting about little bits and pieces at the fringes that they didn't like. But it really made me wonder what's gone on here, because Micheál Martin had seemed to build the whole thing up that he wanted to get rid of the rent pressure zones, that he felt that they were a block in getting investment into the country. And instead, what we have gotten is a solution that, well, we don't really know how it's going to work, but it certainly seems to be a climb back on where they have been heading. Can you tell me?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have been doing some detailed work on this, and I think if you look at the impact in relation to those with 3 or less properties and institutional investors, the critical difference is that the smaller landlord, actually to get value, because these rent caps will suppress rents, has to really sell the property. And this is probably going to accelerate the exodus of the smaller landlords. Conversely, the institutional, call them what you like, vulture capital funds or whatever, they're selling the rent roll. So they want the tenants in situ. Their whole business model is, we build 300 apartments, we fill it up, it's yielding a return of 4.5% of rent on the property, and we'll now sell the asset. So that is their business model. So the changes are quite sophisticated. But, you know, you're absolutely right. I was watching the 9 o'clock news, and to my amazement, because I had been told some of the detail of what was involved. And the clip of Owen O'Brien was the government was being accused of dismantling the RPZ process, which couldn't be further from the truth. So the situation is, what they have done is, for all 200,000 existing tenancies that are subject to RPZs at various times since 2016, they're being rolled over identically. 2% cap or inflation, whichever is the lower. So if you're upset about that, there's absolutely no change. Big win for tenants. Second step is that 83% of the country is covered by rent pressure zones. That's been extended to 100%, and that was planned for the 1st of March next year, is now being brought forward to as soon as possible emergency legislation. So that's 17%. We'll call it another, it could be another 80,000 tenancies will be brought into it in rural areas and so on. Now, the wins for the institutions are, first of all, 2 things. So a new tenancy from last Tuesday. So if you were building a project and you had a commencement date, now that's a very official, so you get your planning permission, the commencement date is a legal start date, and you can actually change your commencement date. If you had one before, you could change it to update it to now. So anything after the commencement date, the cap will not be any percent, it'll be the consumer price index. And in fact, the CPI has been replaced by a European index. The second thing is that if a tenant leaves of their own volition, just they move on, they buy a house or whatever, you can reset the rent on the next lease. However,
you can reset it to what they call the market rent. So say, just take
there's no cap.
Figures. Yeah. So say if you were charging €2,000 on an apartment in an apartment block in Dublin, and that was only going up by the rate of inflation, be it 2%, 3% or whatever, and a couple of years in, that person decides to leave and you've got vacant possession, the landlord can test, well, I'll put it on the market for 2,500. Mm-hmm. And if they get 2,500, they sign a new contract, and that 2,500 then goes up by the rate of inflation.
To which the opposition said, now you've given a huge incentive for landlords to get rid of people, okay? Which is, it sort of makes sense. So the caveat they put in, if I take an order against you as a tenant to get you out, under any grounds, you cannot reset the rent. In other words, if other than someone voluntarily leaves, so they put in a safeguard to not give an incentive to reset the rent.
Will they be able to? I mean, this whole thing about no-fault evictions and stuff, But you can still evict a tenant, like if the tenant trashes the property.
Well, that's a fault eviction.
Yeah, if the tenant doesn't pay their rent. I know there are people, landlords, I've heard complaining that there are some tenants who might be up to 2 years without paying their rent before the eviction finally goes through. But put it basically this way, is if you don't pay your rent or if you don't keep your property or do things, you can be evicted.
Yeah, or unsocial behaviour maybe, or something like that, if you had music blaring and the rest of the tenants. The other significant change is for after the commencement order of this week, every 6 years you can reset the rent. You can say, so your lease will be for 6 years, but they'll want to have continuity of tenancy because they're selling the rent roll. The no-fault eviction ban has been reintroduced. Remember that was got rid of, and remember tenant in situ and all the fears of homelessness. The no-fault eviction ban has been introduced for any landlord with 4 or more properties. Now, the circumstances still remain for someone with less than that properties. They can say the criteria is, I need to completely refurb the property, I want to sell the property, I require the property for a family member, or I want to change it into a gym or an office or whatever. Those are for landlords less than 3 or less, that can still be done. So
why do you think then that a lot of these landlords are going to sell?
Well, first of all, I think the institutions have given a broad welcome, but let's be clear. Ronan, so today there are about 2,300 properties to rent in Ireland, residential properties.
That's all.
Yeah, the recommended minimum is 10,000 and the desirable amount is 15,000. That's if you read Ronan Lyons or Marion Finnegan, that's where the reality is. Will these measures stimulate massive development? The feeling is, if you really wanted to do that, from the commencement order date, the new ones, you would say 4% or inflation, whichever is the higher. That was the where Ronan Lyons had said the trigger was. The other couple of interesting things. First of all, the Housing Commission recommended reference rents. They looked in detail in the Housing Agency on this, and they said it was just too complex to compile the data. It would take too long and too cumbersome, and they rejected that on administrative grounds. So, go back to that question I asked you. I mean, why do you think there will be with people with fewer than 4 rental properties will, as a result of this, decide that they want to sell? Because the cap will mean they won't get... It's generally reckoned they need an 8% return on their property, okay? The private landlords, right?
Why 8%?
Well, that's just the figure that they feel that would be the desirable objective.
Is that to cover things like your costs of refurbishment and stuff like that, or putting in new equipment?
Well, put it like this, it would be a net return. So, let's be clear.
Sorry, there is a big issue. I think a lot of private landlords have a major issue, don't they, with the taxation treatment.
That's where I'm coming to.
Yeah, because the institutions are able to use all sorts of mechanisms and the rest of it to limit their tax that they pay, and they pay perhaps minimal amounts in Ireland. They do pay local property tax, whatever, but taxes on the rental income can be put into various mechanisms and can be held overseas. So whereas people here in Ireland, if you own a property, you could be paying, 52% plus tax and the rest of it on your rental income.
Correct. So, actually, this was explained to me, that institutional investors have the benefit of ICAVs, ICAVs, which are Irish Collective Asset Management Vehicles, which means they pay on their rent roll somewhere between 0 and 20%.
Yeah.
Okay? Whereas you're paying at your marginal income tax rate, and some of the allowances for your expenditures and depreciation aren't allowed. The tax treatment of private landlords requires a higher return. So this cap will mean they won't get the 8%. And therefore, they'll say, look, the only way I can realise value is to sell the property. So the feeling is, in the short term, this will actually reduce the rental stock that's available because these private landlords will go. But in the long term, institutions may do more.
Yeah, but hold on, 2 things in that. If the private landlords are to sell, isn't there not a provision now coming in that they'll have to sell with the tenant in situ, rather than actually selling, removing the tenant and then selling to somebody who might buy it for private use as a house rather than as a landlord?
Well, this comes to part 4 of what was introduced in 2022, which was a significant change. Basically, if you were a tenant, even a student, once more you had more than a 6 months lease, you were entitled to an indefinite lease. This was something Dara introduced and was really problematic for people. You're entitled to it in perpetuity, except in certain circumstances, and they couldn't go back more than 6 years because of the constitutional advice at the time. So the situation is that it will be possible. In the circumstances that the landlord wants to sell, they may be able to get vacant possession in a way that the institutions won't, because the no-fault ban, which would be a no-fault basis of getting rid of someone out of it, that they would be allowed to do that. So what I'm reading in the overall here is this, that this... The reason why they wanted inflation is that if you have a 2%, this is for the big investors, they could say, well, if inflation or construction inflation is more than 2%, the pension funds could actually lose money. And so they wanted the safeguard of inflation as the indicator. And in fact, the housing agency recommended not 2%. They recommended inflation across the board, even for the existing one. And the government rejected that again in favour of the tenants. So, look, So
in other words, is this good politics from the point of view that populist politics and that it has been seen to support the tenant as against the big evil landlord? But in doing that, has the government handicapped itself in finding the investment which it said is required to actually build all of the houses that we need and apartments?
So that is, you've put your finger on the nub of this. They have gone for a populist political win over the supply, in my opinion. Basically, in my opinion, I'm against tariffs and I'm against this type of regulation, even though there are difficult consequences. Like if someone's two-bedroom flat in Chapel Lizard is frozen at $1,600 a month and the market rate would be $2,500 a month on the next door neighbours or same size unit in the same block, you can see that that is a problem. What the long-term impact of the rent caps is, one, this is internationally, in my opinion, they kind of fudged it and said, well, there was no clear-cut evidence from the housing agency. I think it's clear-cut two things. One, it restricts people's mobility, right? In other words, well, am I going to go out of my two-bedroom in Chapel Lizard and go somewhere else? No.
Right, because you might have to pay a lot more somewhere else.
You've got the benefit of suppressed rent. The second thing is that generally it's acknowledged that the effect of rent caps is to reduce investment by 15%, both in upgrading properties and in terms of new properties. And you can go to San Francisco, Finland, Berlin or whatever, and that, I think, is the rule. So, big win, let's be clear. It's very simple. Politicians, the one thing they do better than anyone else is count. There are more tenants than there are landlords, ergo, we're going to support the tenants.
Couple of questions. I know you're a developer.
Yeah.
I have to ask, are you a landlord?
My wife is.
Okay. No, I think we should just be transparent.
Absolutely.
Because it was easy for me because I'm not a landlord.
Yes.
I've never owned a property.
Absolutely.
I have been a tenant.
Absolutely.
And I know what the
she would be in the category
like.
of under three. Okay. And in fact, one of them is the Romanian Ukrainian scheme where you get what was 800 going down to 600 tax free.
Yeah.
So that's full transparency of that. But actually, my reasoning on all this is actually, what will this do to housing supply?
Yeah.
And what will it do to the 25,000 apartments that have planning permission and so on? And my feeling is that further measures will, and the Minister has alluded to this, further measures in terms of incentives, whether it's Croí Cónaithe, whether it's Project Tusig, which are subsidies up to 180 grand per apartment, varying between 120 and 180. Some of the red tape that you had to commit to leasing it for 50 years and not selling it meant that instead of 5,000 in the scheme, there was only a couple of hundred. So basically, if you really want to turbocharge construction of apartments, viability of apartments, more needs to be done. This won't do it.
Well, a couple of things before we go to the break that's come out of it. James Brown, the Housing Minister, was in the studio with me on Tuesday for the last word.
How did you think he did?
I mean, he's very softly spoken. He's very understated. He's not ebullient like Darragh O'Brien used to be. But where did Darragh O'Brien's ebullience bring us? Right? So let's see. Let's judge, we'll see if he manages to get supply going again. There were one thing that I did ask him about, which he sort of did fudge on, and Pascal Donoghue had previously fudged on this one as well, is the whole issue in relation to using Irish money for institutional investment. Because all the talk is about attracting in the foreign funds, be it the Canadian, American, Australian, German, whatever. But what about all of the money we have sitting in bank accounts here in Ireland, and low-yielding bank accounts, about 177 billion euro? And there was sort of like humming and hawing and all the rest of it. But I mean, he did admit, yes, they have a scheme in France which has worked very well for decades. I think we have to really look at a way. And, maybe you put the same tax benefits in place that are available for the so-called vulture funds, the foreign institutions. Maybe you make and I know then people will start jumping up and down and start saying, oh, you're making tax benefits available for those who have loads of money. But the reality is, all this money is there. We need it to be put to better use than just sitting on deposit in the bank. So let's come up with a scheme in which tens of billions could actually be used over the next decade of Irish money to provide Irish housing and to provide rental income for the people who put that. And I can't see why the opposition would actually oppose that if Irish money was been put to that use.
Yeah, I agree. But you can invest if you want to, both in LTIFs, both here and in Europe, but you can invest in Glenveagh or Cairn PLCs. You can invest in REITs. There are ways you can invest. I think 6% return is sort of what's looked at there. But totally, the issue there is going to be absolutely give them the tax concession, the same. The issue will be for savers, are you given a state guarantee? That's the question. Because, the central bank guarantee that your money won't be lost.
And one other thing before the break, I think what's happened this week is only one of a series of measures that has to be done by the government. And let's remember, I think the majority of people, and I think there were stats I saw this week as well about this, which suggested that, about 85% of people want to own their own house rather than being a renter. That's what the ambition of young people. And for all about wanting to be able to get rents that they're more easily able to afford, they often see it as a stepping stone to actually being able to go and buy. There were figures out from the CSO this week which suggested 1/10 of people actually are worth over £1 million because of property, right? And which again goes to,
that's the roof over their head.
Well, it is, but
it's not necessarily an investment.
No, but
it's where they live.
But it is where they live, and I understand that. But it also becomes an asset that you could theoretically sell, and if you're going to leave it on to somebody else,
but you have to find somewhere else to live.
I fully understand that. Fully understand that. But it does give you, local property taxes is something that we seem to be on our own in Europe and trying to have at such a low level. Anyway, the point is, the important thing is people want to buy. And the big thing that the government has to do in the coming weeks, and I'm waiting to see how they manage to do this, is in relation to zoned land and the National Development Plan. And we had the absolutely crazy situation on the back of the last National Development Plan, which set targets in various council areas for the minimum sort of amount of housing that should be provided became a maximum as far as local councillors. And we had the crazy situation, particularly in places like Kildare and Wicklow and Meath, where serviced land that was zoned for residential and which developers were willing to actually build on was dezoned and put out of commission.
40%, if you take the 31 local, 40% of land that was zoned to housing in the middle of a housing crisis over the last 5 years was dezoned. 40%.
That's criminal.
And in fact, let's be clear about it. The Office of the Planning Regulator drove a lot of that. And it was a big, big mistake.
And local councillors as well. They're not building in my backyard type thing.
Now,
This is going to be a major test of the government in the next few weeks, whether it instructs and insists that all that land be immediately rezoned to be made available for building.
Two things about that is, one, they have triggered the legislation in the Planning Act for UTZs, Urban Development Zones, which will give scaled development. They're looking at the Land Development Agency. But right in the middle of this, I've been speaking ad nauseum about planning, what needs to be done to change it, from JRs to Bord Planola to zoning. But Irish Water's latest dispatch, which you sent me a copy of, is really interesting. So they've been given 25 to 29, 10.3 billion. They've said, if you want to get new development, you need to have 2 billion more in that time frame. But they have said in a stark warning in evidence to the Oireachtas Committee that there would be no capacity for any new homes in Dublin in less than 3 years unless they get the Clonshock project approved. Still stuck in the judicial review process. Absolutely shame. But the second point they made, which is different, so that's 25 to 29. In the year 2030, they say they specifically need 3.7 billion on top of that. So they're actually looking for 15.6 billion. It's a once-off situation. It means that over 20% of all the National Development Plan will go into infrastructure of water. This is really important that the government... This is a yes or no question. Are you going to do this? And we must make provision for it, and it's absolutely essential.
Okay, we need to take a break. We've been talking about this so long. When we come back, last week we spoke about the bail laws on the back of the case involving the young man Evan Fitzgerald, who took his own life at Carlow Shopping Centre a couple of weeks ago when he shot himself. He was facing serious gun charges, but there's been some extraordinary developments on that over the last week, and we'll discuss that and other issues when we come back after the break.
This episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm. Greenman Open focuses on investing in grocery-anchored retail real estate, designed to generate stable, long-term income. The fund is managed in Ireland. Learn more on the website greenmanopen.com.
Now, before making any investment, it's important to understand the risks. Investments could go up or down, and past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated LTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Welcome back. So, as I just said there before the break, Ivan, we discussed last week bail laws in relation to Evan Fitzgerald, the 22-year-old man who took a shotgun into Carlow Shopping Centre, fired a few shots in the air and then took his own life. He was facing charges in relation to the possession of far more serious weaponry, which he had sourced via the dark net. And then this week we had some extraordinary revelations courtesy of questioning in a Dáil committee of the Garda Commissioner Drew Harris by Alan Kelly, the former leader of the Labour Party, and also Michael McDougall, Senator Michael McDougall, who brought this issue up in the Seanad as well. And there has been a furious reaction from Garda Síochána in relation to this. Apparently this is an issue that has gone to the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman has apparently okayed the way that the Gardaí actually dealt with this. But it seems that what actually happened in this particular case was that the guns that Evan Fitzgerald and a couple of his mates came into possession of, including a submachine gun, were actually supplied by Garda Síochána.
Yeah, AK sent me a text on Tuesday and he said, I think you should pay attention to this story. And when I asked him for further details about controlled delivery, he didn't reply to me. So I actually had to spend a couple of days researching this. So I got onto my deep throat Garda people and I said, what in the name of God is controlled delivery? So he asked about the provenance of the guns. So basically, apparently, for seized contraband and illegal arms, there's a warehouse in the Phoenix Park.
A depository of some kind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what they do is with the weaponry, could be an AK-47, could be a Glock or a Remington pistol or whatever it is, they disable it. They take out the firing pin. But what they do is, and for drugs, they do a sting operation whereby they see Matt Cooper wants to buy guns or is in organised crime and is involved in drugs. So what they do is they, through an undercover operation, say, we'll give you the drugs, we'll give you the guns. And then
this sounds like they've been watching too many movies.
Well, no, this actually, over the years, I think has proven a successful tactic. So Interpol alerted them to Mr. Fitzgerald's interest in guns, inordinate interest in guns, and so they set up this form of sting. And then, lo and behold, right, what happened was, he brought two mates along. Lo and behold, when he was driving back from collecting the guns that the undercover cops gave them, right, they were stopped by the police. Can we look in the boot? And they found the guns. So next thing, this was where the Nace case before Judge Ziden came up. So now we're looking at the transcript of that evidence of the hearing of that case, and the judge asked the question, and do we know the source of the guns? So here are the Gardaí arresting them, and the Gardaí providing them knew the source of the guns.
But they didn't say that.
They said it was still under investigation.
When they knew, actually.
So I mean, like that requires some investigation. Even worse, what did they do? FISRU, which is the GSOC modernisation organisation, they can take up to 8 years to investigate stuff. And there's people actually suspended from the force, pending, in all sorts of turmoil, personal turmoil, over an incident, because the whole purpose of GSOC and FISRU is to investigate Garda operations. So, basically, they came back in 3 weeks, said, nothing to see here. What? First of all, to do it in 3 weeks. So there's an issue about also in that same Justice Committee hearing, the Commissioner was asked about, just tell us about the FISRU thing, and he said he referred it on the 18th. Alan Kelly is alleging that Jim O'Callaghan replied to him that he couldn't answer on the 10th of May because it was before FISRU, which, means a week earlier than it had actually been referred. So FISRU have done more to damage their own credibility over this incident, and that will have to be investigated. So
you don't see the thing that strikes me about this.
It gets worse. Go on.
But see, what really strikes me about this is you can understand whereby if you're talking about really serious hardened criminals, people involved in drug distribution or involved in subversive activities, why you would do a sting of this type, right? But when you have a situation of a young fella who they had done an investigation into and they knew was not involved in any criminality. Yes, he had a problem with an obsession with guns and he went shooting up in the woods. And yes, we know that these things in other countries have developed into other situations. And, thankfully, what happened in Carlow Shopping Centre did not involve other people getting injured or shot. And it could have developed into that. But they had the evidence that he was on the dark web looking for these guns. You have to wonder, well, if they hadn't intervened and provided the guns, would he have been able to get them from anywhere else?
The shotgun.
No, that's a separate. No, leave that.
The shotgun he used to kill himself was not part of the Gardaí.
No, I know that.
They do disable them, they can't actually use them.
That's not the point, Ivan. Sorry. Yeah. And you're distracting me there now, Ben.
No, because I actually was going in the same direction as you. Was this a suitable case for...
Exactly. Was this not a guy who needed to be intercepted almost and sort of like almost getting help in relation to his situation, because he wasn't looking to buy these guns to perform armed robberies or things like that, or to be involved in enforcement of drug debt collection or delivery of drugs and all the rest of it. They had the evidence of him contracting via the dark web to get the guns. Well, when you say contracting, he didn't, because he didn't do a deal with anybody to get the guns other than in Garda Síochána.
Yes. So this is the big question, and that's exactly where it's going. Was this a suitable case for controlled delivery, and was there a serious error of judgment? The case against it being is this, that first of all, Evan Fitzgerald, with the actual case pending, there was issue about bail, but his conviction and possible sentencing, he felt really bad for his two mates apparently, who weren't involved in any way, and it seems that he was overwhelmed by the whole case, overwhelmed with guilt, and took his own life. The suggestion is that he went to his grave not knowing that the guns for which he was facing conviction on were actually
disarmed.
No, had been provided by the police. He didn't know that. So, that is, and also then, see, the problem is when you ring up your deep throats to find out, they pour another load of manure on you. They said the amount of disquiet in the force over the Tina Satchwell and Michael Gaine case is quite considerable. So what people are saying, right, like good cops are saying, is number one, it is kind of 101 belt and braces policing that you would do a thorough search of the house. The fact that Tina Satchwell was buried under the stairs for 7 years without being found was a huge indictment on the original investigation.
But I agree, and I brought this up. I mean, the idea that a sniffer dog was only brought in, and there's a Garda who took over control of the case in 2021. She deserves enormous credit because she decided to go back and dig into it.
But did they even pull up the carpet? I mean, to find the new concrete which they found.
They saw that there was paintwork, new paint paintwork on wooden stuff like that. They had their suspicions at the time and didn't actually investigate. Now, I see Drew Harris as well as even saying there's no need to actually have sniffer dogs. It's like we'll borrow one from the north when we need one.
The second case...
Sorry, cadaver dogs.
Yes,
that's the difference, because they do have sniffer dogs. Although, actually, are they the revenue commissioner's sniffer dogs at the airport?
For the drugs.
For after drugs rather than a Garda Síochána. Anyway,
but the second thing there's serious disquiet about is the Michael Gaine case in Kenmare.
Which we need to be careful, because this is an ongoing investigation and no charges at this stage have been brought.
But what the disquiet is about was that the slurry pit. What was the search done day one about the slurry pit? And apparently it is absolutely gruesome. So the way you would, in a slurry pit, which was there a while, you would put an agitator in first, which would rip up all the solid materials and so on. And so that resulted in a situation before you spread the slurry, and then the human remains, the vertebrae, were found in the field. Like, the question is, did they drain the slurry pit? And then, now the contemporary thing, it'll be like Toscan de Plantier, will there ever be a successful prosecution because it was bungled in terms of the search of the pit? And like, they searched everywhere. So what I'm saying is this: there are very credible people in the police force really concerned about those two investigations, and there are other people. And in fairness, let's say, and Alan Kelly on The Last Word did say this, that a lot of the Evan Fitzgerald stuff was actually in the Mail on Sunday through John Lee way before he actually took his own life on the 1st of June. And that there was disquiet about the Evan Fitzgerald, we'll call it entrapment sting operation, well before he took his own life. Do you understand me? But
there's nothing to see here, we've been told. The Gardaí are saying...
Well, Fitzgerald are saying that. But no, but sorry.
Well, the Gardaí are saying that as well.
No, so the most difficult point for the Gardaí involved is... Was the evidence given to the judge about the provenance of the guns correct? And was the judge misled?
Okay, listen, one other thing I want to talk about, and we'll save everything else for the subscription edition. We talked last week a little bit about defamation, which we always applied to the media. But there's been an unusual campaign started by Neil MacDonald and ISME in relation to defamation. And he sent me some of the details of this. I think he sent it to you as well. And this is the thing about...
He said to me, don't mention my name. He sent me 2 texts because I get blamed for all this stuff, but carry on.
But hold on a second.
No, he sent me the same stuff.
Yeah, but he's been putting it up on LinkedIn.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not like his secret. Neil, I'm very sorry for outing you for actually saying...
None of this came from me, obviously. That's what everyone says to me. My Garda sources and other... You can't mention even the ICAVs and all that in relation to... Do not mention my name. Why are people so precious about it? Because I'm happy to give everyone a plug, including ISME.
Okay, ISME is doing
so
a campaign.
Let's be clear, Neil. He outed you, not me. I was going to keep your name under the... I was going to talk about retailers and so on. But this is a good story.
I'm actually now going into my LinkedIn account to be absolutely sure that Neil MacDonald has been writing about
No, he sent the article to the Irish Times. It hasn't been published yet. No, he makes some very good points.
Sorry, hold on a second. I'm just looking at, he has, for example, from 2 weeks ago, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the reason Ireland has 14 times the level of personal injuries litigation as England and Wales. Oh, that's a personal injuries one, so that's a different one. Hold on a second, I have to find more of these.
This happens to me all the time. I get these texts. What did you say my name for?
Sorry, yeah, he had a post up. The Defamation Amendment Bill 2024 does not go far enough. Here's why. And then he had an article up on LinkedIn about it. This is the reason why I know about this, is because he goes on about the right to trial by jury in defamation proceedings. He does an assessment of remarks by the Justice Bernard Barton, retired at the Joint Oireachtas Justice Committee.
So you're not only outing poor Neil MacDonald, you're now running the bus back over. Can I get to the substance of the issue?
Yes.
The substance of the issue is, and I was not not aware of this. So previously we discussed this, which is Section 26, what is an honest and fair opinion, what is in the public interest. All of those defences have failed. The issue of juries, the issues of, for personal injuries, that you would have a set of awards, a capping of awards, all that good stuff is out there. But what he's highlighted to me, which I wasn't aware of, is this. So we know that people thieving, pilfering, and putting stuff in their handbags, putting stuff in their shopping bag and not paying for it. So what they do in retail world is they peer into your bag and say, Mr. Cooper, can we see the receipt? Can we check your items? Now, what has happened is, like this to tell you about the real world in Ireland. So Mr. Cooper turns around and says, oh, you're accusing me of thieving. I'm going to sue you. So they go to the circuit court. And they lose in the circuit court. It's a try-on. So then what they do is, well, actually, we're going to appeal it to the High Court. Now it's reached the point, that both for the insurance or the retailer, that it's not worth the legal costs, which are now times 10 because of the High Court costs. And they know this, so they settle the case. And this is a unbelievable drain on resources.
Hold on a second. Now, I know a little bit about this.
This is called transient retail defamation.
Okay, but a couple of things there. How can those people afford to go to the circuit court and then appeal to a higher court unless they have lawyers doing it on no fee basis?
I really despair. After the last 18 months, have I taught you nothing about solicitors and barristers? It's a no foal, no fee. It's a win-win. They've got to find one horseshoe bat, one slug, one snail, one case that they can win, and ching-ching, they get the fees. Now, so This the factual case.
Sorry, no, hold on. I have more questions.
They're all ambulance chasers.
Yeah, but what if the people have stolen the stuff? Then surely a defamation action is going to fail on the basis, well, actually, we found the offending items in your bag and you haven't paid for them.
By virtue of the appeal, the cost is more than the justice in the issue. So let's get back to the politics of this. Helen McEntee wrote into the defamation legislation, which died in the last all, a specific provision that asking to see a receipt or open a bag would not pass this transient retail defamation test. In other words, it would not constitute a defamation in base law. No tort would arise. And what happens? This government and this minister, both of whom are eminent senior counsels, both of whom have in their past careers, and good luck to them, as senior counsels, have actually been involved in defamation cases, they decided, Rossa Fanning and Jim O'Callaghan, barristers, oh, well, we can't have this. You can imagine why they might think that. And they have taken it out. So the AG altered this to qualified privilege, which has been described to me as chocolate fireguard stuff. Retailers win most of these cases already on qualified privilege in the circuit court, but plaintiffs just appeal to the High Court because the cost of the High Court, defendants must settle. This is what the lawyers want. Everyone gets paid. So is it appropriate that you have barristers who are potential future beneficiaries of this defamation should be judge and jury?
I'll tell you two things.
CC, Mihal, watch this space. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this is, like Ireland, we're going to talk about the cost of living in the other episode, Ian Geiger's good article. Rip-off Republic is the vanguard of that is being driven by the legal profession. And whether it's planning or whether it's anything else, they are making a fortune out of the legal system, and it needs to be called out for what it is, a racket.
You don't like lawyers, do you?
No, well, I put it like this. It's not in the public interest.
I'll give you two little short stories to follow that lengthy diatribe. The first one is, as it happens, my understanding at the moment is there are very few retailers who now challenge anyone in a shop who is shoplifting, right? There's almost a policy at this stage not to do so. It's become built into sort of a shrinkage, I think is what some of them call it, that you assume that a certain amount of stuff will be stolen and it's too dangerous to intervene in many cases. it's physically dangerous for staff, and a lot of them are told to just let things go, which is quite a
And you
remarkable...
can't have bodily contact with a robber.
Yeah, so you can't...
You could be sued for that. Like, it's ridiculous. Where are the judiciary? Like, where's common sense in all of this?
Yeah.
In the toilet, that's where it is.
Yeah. And the second thing, I'm laughing, you mentioned about Jim O'Callaghan and defamation and the rest of it, because this is going back about 20 years or so ago. Yeah, just short of 20 years ago. I was in receipt of a legal action from a good friend of yours, a fella called Dennis O'Brien. And it was basically a RT television programme that I had made about tax avoidance. And let's just be clear, it was about tax avoidance, not tax evasion. That's an important legal distinction. And but anyway, he was upset about elements of the programme, and he took an action against RTE, which I'd made the programme for. It was a investigative documentary. And who was the senior counsel that he used in relation to the action taken against RT, but one Jim O'Callaghan? So can you imagine my surprise when a few months later, I had to swear out replying affidavits on behalf of RT and all the rest of it for a case that eventually went nowhere. He never progressed the case. It was one of these ones left hanging in abeyance, which often happens as well as a way. Anyway, Jim O'Callaghan knocks on my front door when he was standing as a Fianna Fáil candidate in the general election in 2007.
He was elected to the door in 2016.
Yeah,
so he was on the locals before that, maybe.
He ran
this was in 2016, was it?
No, this is 2007. He didn't get elected.
Okay.
You know, he didn't. He failed to get elected on a number of occasions before he ever did. And he knocked on my door. I remember looking at him and going, and he's there and he starts making the pitch for my vote. And
he knew who you were.
He did.
Yeah,
He did. Well, and
I have to say that to a lot of people. Do you not know who I am?
Well, I put it this way. If you're calling door to door, you usually have a register of electors and stuff like that. So I'm not making the assumption that he knew who I was, sort of thing like that. But anyway, there he is, bold as brass, asking me for a vote. And I'm just there biting my lip and going, Anyway, not that I'm one bitter, not that I'm one that remembers things like that and all the rest of it and stuff, but less to be said that in his failure to get elected to the Dáil at that time, I didn't contribute a vote towards his failure, shall we say, or a preference of any kind. Okay. We better leave it there. We have lots of things that we want to talk about in the
I've been at a few interesting things this week. For my after dinner speaking, I usually talk about my war stories in politics and business and media. I actually discussed my drinking career. I was at a whiskey event, which I want to tell you about, which is a bit of crack in Temple Bar. I want to talk to you about the cost of living, but most especially what I want to talk to you about, and you send me some data in this regard, is there's some important economic things coming up, the summer economic statement, budget 26. Some of my sources in the Department of Finance have been telling me some very interesting things.
All of that for the subscription edition.
Pascal's next job? Will this be his last budget?
Oh, there's a teaser, isn't it? Right, from me, Matt Cooper.
Me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for being with us.